I think we've got everybody. Kachina, we got Raul, Subrat, Sandhip, Catherine, and then we've got me. I think that's it for today. Did I miss somebody? I think we're okay. Cool. And Kachina, what I've done is I'm recording it for anyone who's ill or couldn't make it or would like to see this afterwards, because it's going to be a nice little quick overview of the process so that we're all familiar with it and have everyone walk through it. That way, when we do the actual exercise, the real one, later this month or no later than early November, depending on what Raul and Sendip recommend and can work out with Reach, everyone will have a better feel for each of the step for the most important part of this initial exercise. So, sound good? Okay.
Yes, David.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, is there anything you want to share first before I launch into an overview? Because the core is, I'm going to just sort of walk you through, not all the slides, don't worry. I'm just going to highlight some of the slides, just give you a feel for what I'm going to do. Normally, I'd spend about 40 minutes or 45 minutes at maximum for the day, and we would go over the slides. Maybe I could even go to an hour after discussion, but mostly an overview of what the 3 steps are like. And I'm going to just highlight them today for our session, for our exercise. Then I have everyone navigate, which we're all going to do, to Google Sheets. And everyone has the URL for that, right? For the Google Sheets, thumbs up. Okay. Just checking. Okay, thanks. So we'll navigate that, and we're going to just walk through the process, all 3 steps on the Google Sheets, so that everyone's comfortable with it and see how easy and straightforward it is. At a different session, we can go over the evaluation dashboards. We don't have to do that tonight, because once the workshop is done, the initial one, then we're going to have everyone set up specific goals in relation to what they have, but there'll be new ones in addition. We'll have them help. I'll show you how I like to set up milestones. I'm not going to do it tonight. I just want to tell you where we're going next. Milestones each quarter. And then the only thing they have to do is work with you and your colleagues to make sure that they're working towards those quarterly milestones. And if they're not, once again, we don't slap anyone on the wrist. We say, oh, that's not working. Who knows how to make that work where you are? Come on and talk to us. And we then modify our strategies or help them modify their strategies, help them get closer to where the milestones should be. But once again, I'm only saying that so you know where the roadmap is going to go, not what we're going to do tonight. Tonight will just be a few slides, and then we're going to go over going through Google Sheets, the initial exercise. But I do want to let you know it wraps up into kind of an intense amount of work on our part of then breaking it down into evaluation dashboards. So sound good so far?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. All right. So let me start launching into it, unless there's something else someone has in mind that they want to mention first. Is that and by the way, interrupt me anytime, of course, because with Zoom and stuff like that, you don't always know the body language and whether we're having a pause that means anything. So feel free to interrupt. But sound good? Okay, I'm going to go now into the sharing the screen right off the bat. And I'm just going to go right to the slides. So I'll do this like though. I would then go to my tabletop like this. And what I want to do is tell me, can you see the slides before I launch into them? Okay, beautiful. Wait a second. So I'm just going to do an abbreviated version. Don't worry. So give me about, say, 10 minutes versus like 40 minutes or like that, just to give you a feel for what I'm going to do. And let me just move you over to the top here so it's visually a little bit easier for me. So there we go. Okay, today we're just going to be talking a little bit about empowerment evaluation. And I want to share some very simple, straightforward steps on how you can help assess yourself and help others assess themselves to build greater evaluation capacity. And some of you know that I've been to Nepal not so long ago with my family. And one of the things that I learned as I was going to Nepal, and we're going to Mount Everest Base Camp, is that we traveled a lot of these bridges, as you can see. And I think evaluation can be like a bridge for all of us over troubled waters. But before we do that, we want to look at the landscape when you are traveling, so you have a better idea what the journey is going to be like. So I just want to just briefly mention some stakeholder involvement approaches to evaluation. And I want to just have you get a better idea of what empowerment evaluation is within the context of these approaches. And I'll only spend a few seconds on it, but you'll see where empowerment sits in relation to other forms of stakeholder involvement approaches. If you look at the role of the evaluator, that's the core. For example, in a collaborative form of evaluation, the evaluator is in charge. And they say, you know, if we work on this, we can make this successful if you collaborate with me. In participatory forms of evaluation, which many of you are already familiar with, you're sharing the control of the evaluation. We work together on this, it'll be a success. What we're going to highlight today is a little different than both of those. It's going to be empowerment evaluation. It's where Reach, in this case, is in charge. The folks you work with are in charge. And we serve as facilitators, coaches, critical friends. It changes the whole nature of the evaluation. I've done a lot of work in collaborative. I've done a lot of work in participatory. And the aim typically is to do as much work as you can with folks and hand it over, and eventually they take it over. But in my experience, I've never had it happen. So I decided, why not start where you want to finish? I decided, let's have you in charge first and not wait. And I will not abdicate my responsibility. And as co-evaluators, none of us will abdicate our responsibility to help folks, particularly as we're talking about Reach in particular in this case. But they're going to be in charge of the effort. We're going to be the coaches and facilitators with our expertise to keep things on track. That's a very fast, broad strokes approach to showing you what we're talking about when we talk about stakeholder involvement approaches, and why it's important that we're going to focus on empowerment for all of us today. Briefly, and don't worry, I'm not going to go over all the slides, just so you know right now. I'm only going to go up to this, a little bit at the beginning, and then the 3 steps, and then I'll stop so we can spend the time going to navigating on Google Sheets. But this is the flavor of what it's going to sound like for the initial part of it. Anyway, I mentioned that empowerment evaluation is international, how we operate in Mexico, in Nepal, New Zealand, South Africa, work with UNICEF. I work in squatter settlements as well as in places like Google and Hewlett Packard. And this is a woman who lives in a squatter settlement. If you're not familiar with squatter settlements in South Africa, they don't have any electricity, very little water, very desolate, situation from almost anyone's perspective. And yet, the only thing you need for empowerment evaluation, even in this situation, is the desire for a better life. And if you look on the right-hand corner, you see a daycare center. Even in this situation, which can be about 20,000 people at a time, by the way, with this kind of situation economically, there's a hope for a better life. And that's all you need to do empowerment evaluation. Anyway, I'm going to go over 4 examples, by the way, not now, but during the actual exercise, I will go over 4 examples to show you how empowerment evaluation operates in different contexts. One will be in Hewlett Packard, where it's a $15 million project where the aim was to bridge the digital divide in communities of color. In Arkansas schools, I still work with those schools to get them out of academic distress. We also use it at Stanford School of Medicine to get through accreditation. And I've been working in Arkansas for about 13 or 14 years, I guess 15 years on tobacco prevention and other forms, other health issues to reduce the use of, in this case, tobacco in minority communities. I also do empowerment evaluation remotely well before COVID, and working with over 56 or 57 computer science education evaluators, and most of us have never met each other ever. We just know each other through Zoom and Google Sheets, doing our own self-assessments over these years. That's my back over there in the right-hand corner at Google. And then also we use it in graduate schools as well, Pacifica Graduate Institute. Anyway, I'm briefly going to go over this and then 3 steps. And by the way, I'll stop. Katrina, go ahead.
David, I was wondering, would you be able to give an example of a non-English speaking situation and where you've used it?
Oh yeah, in Japan, for example, we use it extensively. We were brought in because, I don't know if you remember, but remember the blood got contaminated with HIV and the Surgeon General resigned, what we would call their Surgeon General. So they called me in and some of my folks, And that's where they needed empowerment evaluation to help AIDS patients it's complicated, but one group was because of sexual behavior, the other one was contamination of blood. And Japan was willing to pay for the folks that got contaminated. And we were there to show that it's a health issue, it should relate to everyone. And we worked with a lot of hospitals. And ironically, one of my former students just accidentally got assigned to me to help do some translation and for the actual exercises and that sort of thing. And it worked perfectly, adapting it to some of the Japanese context, which is very, very hierarchical. And they had a tough time decentralizing, but they were open to this. Same thing in Brazil. I work in Brazil and we do the same thing. And in this case, it's in Portuguese. And I've done that 2 or 3 times now, one with simultaneous translation with the US consulate. Another time we had just a simultaneous translator. And like the third time we had the other one that I don't like as much, but you do what you can, where I speak, they speak, back and forth, that sort of thing. But regardless of the language, which was not really a key issue because we had different translation, the cultural issues they're very different cultures, but they all have the same basic adaptation and use of the 3 steps. When I worked with Native Americans in the different tribes, I think it was 18 different tribes in San Diego, they came up with an interesting adaptation, and that was representative government. And let me explain why that was important. We had one tribe that had like 3 or 4 representatives. Another one came with 20 people. We had this tech group that helped facilitate a lot of the training and stuff. They had 5 or 6 people. It would have been unfair to have everyone have an equal vote. So I didn't come up with this. They came up with adapting the process so that each group, in this case, each tribe, had their own vote. And they had to have a consensus on it for the ratings, for prioritization, that sort of thing. So between the language issues and then the cultural ones in terms of how to adapt, and also with the Native Americans, we also made sure the tribal leaders gave the benediction and also respected their concerns about who and could see the reports that we disseminated, that we shared afterwards. So we tried to adapt it to the cultural concerns. We also had tobacco and smudge ceremonies. So whatever was relevant and appropriate for the group that you're working with, you accept those customs and traditions and build them into the process. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
But so we work in many, many different cultures, and the idea is to it's so far in about 16 or 17 countries so far that we've worked in. It's always worked the same basic way. There have been detours and there are adaptations, and that's the way it should be. That's okay. But and I should mention also sometimes in the middle of, say, the steps. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, and this happened, by the way. Let me just briefly jump to it, just as an example of. I know I sound sometimes, very linear because I go step 1, step 2, step 3, and I try to move things along, and I'm very goal oriented. But I have to let you know I am open to detours. And here's a mistake I've made one before that helped teach me that it's important to take detours when you need to. When I was in a township in South Africa, we're working on teenage pregnancy prevention programs and substance abuse and some other things, hypertension. But the main one was teenage pregnancy prevention programs. Well, in a nutshell, I'm busy going over mission, which we'll go over in a second. I'm almost into taking stock. And some lady yells, "I don't believe in any of this stuff," And I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail in the middle of, a township in South Africa after, all these years. And I go to talk to her to reach out, even to touch her shoulder. I didn't even get that far. And some other lady interrupts and jumps in and touches her shoulder and says, "The reason that we need this is because your daughter is pregnant." In the middle of my workshop, right? It's like, holy cow. Well, there was like yelling, all the stages we all study, denial, frustration, anger. I mean, you can see each one that's in the books. You can see them just play out in real life. Anyway, so now here's how foolish I was. I'm not quite as foolish as I used to be. I thought, I thought I was so smart. Why don't the two of you just take that into the room? Because I know how personal and terrible to have to learn this all at once. And we do have to work with the whole group, and I'm only here so long, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think I'm so smart. I say, why don't the two of you go off there? They go off. And 15 minutes later, it's quiet. I'm working with the group. We're still moving almost into the plans for the future, which is that third stage we'll get to tonight. And I'm like, so inside, I don't say anything, but inside I'm like, wow, I really did it. The large group's more important than the small. I worked out beautifully. And suddenly she yells again, I still don't believe in any of this stuff, right? I'm going, oh my gosh. Let me just stop. How many here would like, I don't know, 1,000,000 kugler, a yacht, a beautiful big home, or a teenage pregnancy prevention program? Nobody raised their hands, right? Nobody. So let me rephrase that. How many of you here don't want a teenage pregnancy prevention program? Think it's the worst thing that we could possibly get, but then nobody raised their hand. Everyone agrees, yeah, we don't want this. But how many of us think we need it given our current situation? And the hands start going up and go. Now, so she goes, oh, I get it. Because by the way, there's no premarital sex allowed in this township, in this Mondavian religion, etc. So it meant a lot, obviously, even more than normal for her kid to be messing around and stuff like that. But the point of the story, just as a quick detour tonight, and I tell that story during the workshop sometimes, depending on the situation and the time, is that while I do believe in taking 1, 2, 3 steps, very linear and very goal-oriented and get things accomplished, I understand sometimes things blow up. People do argue, people get very upset, particularly in the taking stock section, and you have to roll with it. And you have to take detours, but you come back once it has a general consensus about where things are. Not perfect. You don't stop, you keep on going. Anyway, I just mentioned that as different things you have to learn to adapt. And also my feeling is the reason I learned a lot from that is that if she had that concern, others did too. So sometimes during the middle of this exercise that we'll go through either this month or next, I like to just warn everyone, yes, I'm very focused. Step 1, step 2, step 3, I'll be going over them in a minute. But you have to, don't be surprised if there's something so outlandish that is said or whatever, that we take a little bit of a detour, even though it doesn't sound like it's on track, and then we pull back on track eventually. But because we respect those, there are underlying concerns that sometimes people don't raise as clearly or as articulately as we might want, but they're there. And in this case, that woman, if she felt that way, others felt that way too, that we shouldn't be having a teenage pregnancy prevention program because it was kind of sacrilegious. So anyway, so I learned over time. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. I mentioned that sometimes during the workshop as well, depending on the tone of how things are going, et cetera. But I just want to make sure we all know, since we're part of a key team, to make sure that while we're going to present tonight or this morning for you is going to be very linear, there are times where we may have to take some detours, but we keep the 3 steps in mind, because in every culture I've worked in, they work. Just a matter of being patient and having some adaptations. So, cool? Yeah. Okay, let me go over. So going back over here for a second, and don't worry, I'm not going to go over all the slides once again, but I just want to bring you to the 3 steps, and then we'll go to Google Sheets. So tonight, or today, I was going to say, we'll focus on the definition. We'll go over the theory, and we have about, I don't know, 6, 7 hours to go over theory, right? Is that tonight? What? Even Sandup's going, what? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Maybe 30 seconds or a minute worth. But we'll go over a little bit of theory, concepts, and the most important thing for tonight or today is the 3 steps. So let me just briefly highlight a couple of these things. I won't go over all of them. But over the definition is really the same as when I introduced it when I was the president of the American Evaluation Association. This was my plenary talk. It is the use of evaluation concepts, techniques, and findings to foster improvement in self-determination. And it hasn't changed. We gave it a little bit more detail as time went on and said it's an approach that increases the probability, because there are no guarantees in life, of achieving program success by providing program stakeholders with the tools for assessing the planning, implementation, and self-evaluation of their program. And this is critical, this last part. It also is mainstreaming evaluation as part of the planning and management of the program or organization. And usually, and I explained to everyone in the workshop, by the time we're done with just even this initial training, you will know how to internalize evaluation as part of what you do, part and parcel of it, not secondary, parasitic, and we'll get to it, or it's getting in the way, taking money away from programmatic things. It is in fact going to be part of how you operate just programmatically. And we'll get into that in more detail. I mentioned briefly that they put me on this side of the tree. They put a lot of the evaluation theorists on the tree, Marv Alkin. People, I like to be intellectually honest, they put me on the use side versus just methods or valuing. And I mentioned that a little bit more detail, but not too much over here. I go over in more detail than we'll do tonight. The contrast between traditional forms of evaluation, and I'm just going to do it very quickly right now, external versus internal, expert versus coach, data warehousing. And I should mention the data warehousing, a lot of the folks will understand, appreciate. It's like when we do an online survey or some sort of old-fashioned face-to-face, or a hard copy survey, and we send it out, we send it out again, we want to have a better response rate, and then again, et cetera, et cetera. And then the worst thing in the world happens, we actually get the stuff, we have to do something with it. So we sort it, chunk it, code it, and then we have to then clean it up, make sure it's written really well, and it goes through, In the meantime, people think we're warehousing it. Even though we're doing everything methodologically correct, it's not in time for their decision-making. So in empowerment evaluation, use data routinely, but on their time cycle. Anyway, you get the idea. In traditional, you're fostering dependency typically because you're doing it, we're the expert. And what would we leave behind? Not much. Whereas when we do empowerment evaluation, they're learning to do the evaluation themselves and building self-determination, and they're building their own capacity. I then go briefly over independent judgment and how wonderful it is and valuable it is in traditional forms of evaluation. But, and it's very valuable in empowerment evaluation, but it's a collaboration in evaluation, empowerment. Independent judgment, you can have someone really phenomenal, like Deloitte and Touche comes in, or the other great folks that come in, very bright, and they give excellent advice, but it's based on when the organization is at a different level of organizational development, a very mature one very often, than where it really is, which is usually at the very beginning stage, and that can kill a program. So it's wonderful to have independent judgment, but it should be rooted in your own internal concerns of your group. And that's why collaboration is necessary. Anyway, I'll go into more detail on these, not too much, but a little bit more. I'm just going quickly tonight. I should mention that traditional forms of evaluation rarely go beyond the initial demonstration, maybe a little bit beyond that. With empowerment, quite frankly, there is no end. It enhances sustainability because whether we come, whether we go, once people have the capacity, they can maintain a certain level of this. Oakland Public School System, I worked there 15 years ago or something like that, and maybe even longer. We transformed a lot of things. We changed the curriculum. We did this, we did that. We did a lot of stuff to turn the place around. New superintendent comes in, you know how they want to come and have their own folks come in. So they got rid of some of the folks that were there, got their new folks, want their own ideas about how to do things. Guess what? They called me in just a year, I think maybe it's 2 years ago, and it was still going. Not full blown, but it was sustained because people love the idea of having some control over their lives and improving it. So was it as good as if we had full funding and support? No. But did it work and maintain it after all that time? So we were able to build on that and revive a lot of the stuff. Anyway, I want to highlight that internal and external are not mutually exclusive. They can work together. But my point in highlighting this slide, when I'm going to go over it in the workshop, is that the empowerment evaluation should be always in the external, should be rooted in internal concerns. Otherwise, they can go askew. Anyway, don't worry. This is part I usually scare people, but stand up, go ahead.
David, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, can you just go back to the last slide, please?
Yep, no problem. Go ahead.
A very interesting one. I have been doing evaluation for the last 10 years or so, largely program evaluations and impact evaluations.
Yeah.
But the way I see it, the clear distinction that you made in the other slide between collaborative, participatory, and empowerment evaluations. Now we have tried to, so the program evaluations are largely rapid, unless you are doing a large country program. These are rapid, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, well, maybe at most 6 months time period.
Yep.
And we have tried to bring in as much participation as possible using different tools for capacity assessment, self-assessment like that. But where we face a bit of challenge is the interpretation of what it is. There is so much of subjectivity into the achievements, right? If you look at whether it is relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, or sustainability, there is the external evaluator brings in certain amount of interpretation into it, certain types of interpretation into it.
Mhm.
But the people who are internal to the program or the project, they bring in their own interpretation to it. So that's where we have faced challenges. So there's not a question necessarily, but I'm quite interested to look at it. I guess empowerment evaluation would take a little much more time. It would be rooted, and since now we are doing it from the beginning of the program, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, yeah, you're right on the money. The reason that this has been so effective for so many years, it's about 21, 22, 23 years now in different places, is because, and look, I used to do traditional evaluation for many years as well, but it never really worked very long, as we all know. We all know the same thing. We all have the same general background. The reason that empowerment has been so effective is because it takes into account exactly what you just said, the subjective perception of reality. One of the things I mentioned, and I'll mention it during the workshop, that relates exactly to what you said is this. And I do tell little stories, by the way, throughout the whole workshop exercise to make it a little more interesting. And this is one of the ones I do tell. And it's relevant to your point, which is right on target. I worked in a VA hospital for some time in the psychiatric ward. And a lot of these guys, and mostly males, think they can fly. Like, I mean, fly. I don't mean like you think like a plane and all that kind of stuff. I mean, physically fly. You may not believe that. I may not believe it. But there are physical, real world consequences for that perception, that subjective perception of reality, if you're on the third floor of that building and there are no bars on the window. So,
Correct.
so to me, I agree 100% with what you're saying, is that we have to take seriously the subjective internal perception and interpretation of reality, because that shapes behavior. So I think you're exactly on the money. That's exactly why this has been so effective, because the more we do that, not only do we show our respect for other people, but we're also then grounding it in what they are already going to act on anyway from their perception of reality.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Yeah, anytime, just let me know. I usually mention that sort of thing during the workshop too, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know that's going to come up, always does. That's not objective, that's, not scientific, blah, blah, blah. And, there are a couple of questions that come up. What is truly objective? I know we approximate as best we can, but we all know it's always shaped and, through the lens that we have culturally, or by our role and power and all the rest. Age, gender, all of it shapes this so-called objectivity. This is the same. So thanks for mentioning that. And by the way, when I'm doing the workshop, feel free to jump in with stuff too. If I don't mention it during the workshop at some critical juncture that you think is a good time, jump in, no problem. I like to mention these things, and it breaks up just the flow of just a lecture type thing. So that's why I tell the stories during it as well. But yes, that's right on the money. Go ahead.
David,
Yeah,
can we? Oh,
sorry, please say. Yeah.
okay. Thanks, Rahul. So David, in a typical community-based projects where we work with the community, in the planning process, we do have very systematic sort of monitoring. And I am using the word monitoring here because as a process, we do a lot of interaction with the community, discuss with the stakeholders, how the work going on and what type of inputs, suggestions or feedback required at the project implementation time. So it's a sort of a regular process which happens in a project setup.
Mhm.
But when I'm looking at the empowerment model, which probably will be talking more from now. So I'm looking at like, are there any sort of timeline or a periodicity where you would like to do this empowerment model in a community setup, or it will be like a regular process as we do the community monitoring also?
Yeah. It'd be beautiful to combine and merge them and just show that this is just one more tool to do that precise activity. One of the things I want to discuss or mention after we do the presentation and then go to Google Sheets is that depending on the goals of the community, their short-term, long-term, et cetera. Typically, I'd like to be able to return to the community, or in this case to reach, but also you should be doing this in the community. It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, not too much longer, it depends on how long it takes to implement the plans for the future, which we'll get to in a second. But once we know what the intervention is going to be after doing the empowerment evaluation exercise, we'll know whether this should be revisited 3 months, 6 months, et cetera, to come back again and say, where are we now on each of these things that they've decided were important? Could be communication, could be funding, could be, product outreach, whatever it might be. Where are we now? And if we're not getting there, what do we need help with? So there's 2 levels that are going to be going on at the same time, and they can be incorporated in any kind of community needs assessment and sort of self-assessment, no problem. But my point is, I want to mention there's 2 levels of monitoring. One will be, once we get to, after mission takes stock and we go to plans for the future, we're going to have the evaluation dashboards I mentioned earlier. And that'll be, what specific goals do you have related to what we just did in our exercise? And what are the milestones to get there? That I like to do on a quarterly basis and make sure that everyone here is helping them find out where are we, or helping them get there and using evaluation tools to get feedback to see if their strategies are working. But once again, I'll go over that later. I just want to mention that now so we have a bigger picture of what we're going to be planning on. So one is going to be measuring where they're going on a quarterly basis. However, what I also like to do is have this exercise, mission, taking stock, planning for the future, and come back 3 months or 6 months later and have a second taking stock to see what does the group think where we are in relation to where we first said we were, and then even a third one at the end of the year. So you have 2 levels of monitoring. One is actually individual kind of programmatic activities and their goals to accomplish what they've already promised for funding. And another one is, as a group, how well are we moving forward as a group towards these things? It'll be clearer as we go through the 3 steps. But I just want to make sure you know that I aim at 2 different levels of monitoring. It helps ensure that we stay on target and are more likely to get to the goals at the end of each year. Is that helpful?
Yeah, David, and I have one more question
Sure.
for my clarification. That what, there is one limitation in the project where we all work. I think Kachina will agree with me that most of the projects are the national program strategic projects are basically developed at a different level, and basically when it comes to the operationalization, it's basically the implementation work we do. So the feedback from the community or the viewpoint of communities are not actually embedded into the while you develop the proposals.
Yeah, that's normal.
So the community will have little say about the design and everything, but the community probably will come when we are talking about tool of empowerment tool or some other tool. So they start talking about something which probably they have not thought of, or they had never even asked for it. But we are doing it because it's a part of the national strategic plan, and we are doing it.
Yeah, that's normal. That's normal.
Yeah.
No problem. Usually what happens here, thanks for mentioning that. What normally happens, almost every project already has external requirements for funding and objectives they have to meet. And quite frankly, there were very little consultation with the community. It's just everywhere. Every part of the world I operate in, it's the same kind of thing. It's called the devil's bargain. To get the money, you've got to do this. It may not be related to really what the community, really from a grassroots perspective, had in mind. Not a problem. Here's why. Number one, there is a requirement to fulfill some of those things, most of them. However, that's different than saying how they are going to be accomplished. Rather than being from top down, it can finally be from folks who actually know how to operate these things. And there's agreement on the goals, the same goals, but maybe slightly different strategies to get there. That's number one. A quick example is I work as I say, in Oakland public school system, and I was helping the teachers. So the superintendent had the decision, the goal of reducing the dropout rate. We're not going to change that, right? That's an external requirement basically for all the teachers and all the folks affiliated with it. Well, so we help the teachers be better teachers, better pedagogy, better this, that, and the other thing, help improve attendance, etc. So we had lower dropout rate. The nurses came to us and they said, we're being fired left and right because they feel they don't need us. We don't contribute to the dropout rate reduction, right? Well, that's an external requirement. So I said, well, what do you, so David said, David, can you help us? I said, well, what do you want to do? I said, we want to improve the health of our kids. I said, well, that's a nice lofty goal, but that's not going to go anywhere because it's not focused enough. You know, I've gone to these health education things and they're kind of meaningless. You know, I fall asleep. There's just every possible health thing under the sun. So we brainstormed, they came up with the idea, let's focus on kids with asthma. I said, that sounds good. And sure enough, they focused the curriculum on kids with asthma so that they would be less likely to have to run to the hospital or not go to school because they had an attack. They knew how to take care of themselves better. My point in that story is the goal doesn't change, the external requirement of reducing the dropout rate. The superintendent decided not to fire them because now they helped keep the kids in school. So you see what I mean? What it did is help them on a local level figure out how to address these larger level issues that they've already agreed on that they really weren't a part of. They weren't part of reducing the dropout rate. They're nurses. They care about the health of the kid, but they don't really care. If they're healthy at home, they're healthy in school, whatever, you know, they don't care. I mean, it's a long-winded response, but it's normal. Let me mention one other thing that happens that's very important. All this gets the external requirements can still be done, but they often become reframed. Here's an example. In the same situation in Oakland, nobody in their right mind wants to take attendance. It's the biggest waste of time. It doesn't achieve anything. It takes away from the curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. However, when they came up with different strategies, that was both the nurses and also the teachers for improving their instruction, pedagogy, learning, engaging folks, and the folks that are in the nursing health profession working on kids with asthma, guess what? He said, how are we going to prove this? How are we going to make sure we made a difference? And they go, well, we could have this whole new system shaping, you know, how we account for all these kids. And someone said, but we have to collect attendance, right? Anyway, right? And we went, yep. So then attendance becomes, wow, really cool and actually useful. So the same things they had to do anyway are reframed in importance once you get to the third step in this empowerment evaluation process, and they then have to actually do something about monitoring where they want to go. That's always what comes out of this as well. Because no one wants to, when you get finally to the point of actually having to do something about all this stuff, which is at the third stage, people are exhausted and they're already overwhelmed with their work anyway. So suddenly the things that they hated doing, they suddenly go, give me the, you know, an easy way to collect that data. And that becomes it. So that's two quick responses. I've been through this a lot. And that's two quick things that happen in the process is the things that they have to do get reframed as proxies for the things that they want to measure anyway. You see what I mean? Is that helpful?
Yeah, David, this is helpful.
Okay, thanks. Well, let me keep on going through, but interrupt me, keep on, because these are good things. This is what I wanted us to do today. We'll go through the steps, don't worry, and we'll go through the Google Sheets, but more important are these questions because they really relate to the real world experience of doing this, knowing that life is not perfect and that they're not going to be in control of everything, but it'll be the first time they'll be able to be in control of getting to where they want to go that they're already held accountable for. Because I always like to emphasize, this is not do whatever you want. It's do what you think is appropriate that will work within the context of what you're already held accountable for. So that people don't have false expectations that they can just do anything. So that's why it's wonderful to have this dialogue and discussion. And if this type of thing comes up during this part, that's good too, during the workshop. Sometimes it comes up during this phase, sometimes while we're going through the steps. Often it comes in a question and answer thing at the end. I'm comfortable with any time it comes through because that helps solidify the understanding. So let me zip through a couple more. And once again, I won't go through all of them, but you'll see why I want to highlight the 3 steps. And then we'll go to Google Sheets. And I want you all to be engaged in that process. So you'll see how simple and straightforward and engaging it can be, even remotely. Anyway, so go over these slides very briefly. I then go over the theory, and I usually scare everyone and remind them and say something like I did before, which is we do have what, six hours, right, to go over just theory, right? And everyone freaks out. And then I go, Raul, save me, you know. And I'm kidding. I'm only spending a couple seconds on each one. And I go over this one. I'll go over them now so you have a feel for how short it is, so you don't think I do get carried away with this. The number one theory shaping empowerment evaluation is process use. All that is the theory that the more that people engage in the act of conducting their own evaluations, the more likely it is that they will find the results credible and act on the recommendations. Why? Because they're theirs. I can come up with all sorts of brilliant, great ideas, but they're not necessarily relevant to their concerns and they haven't engaged in that process. So the number one theory about this process is about this approach is process use. And that's really important because it attacks the biggest problem in the field of evaluation in general, by the way, which is knowledge utilization. We have tons of very well done evaluations sitting on the shelf gathering dust. Lack of knowledge utilization. This one has contributed tremendously to knowledge utilization because people own it. They have a sense of owning and moving forward with it versus some external person who doesn't have a clue what their life is like and what should be done for that community. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about theory number one. Theory number 2 and 3, and then I'll stop on the theories, are these two. By the way, have anyone seen this, the mind the gap? This sign? Katrina, you've seen it, right? Anyone else seen it? Stand up. Have you seen this one? Catherine, you've seen it? No? Okay, let me say, Rolla, have you seen this? Have you
No,
seen
David.
Listen to this. This is cute. I was doing a big workshop in London, and we had some big empowerment evaluation projects going. And they weren't going smoothly. They were working, but people are arguing. Personalities. It's life. So I remember going to the tube, to the subway, the tube over there, to get to the main meeting hall. We were working on our plans and stuff like that. And your mind's all wrapped up with the logistics and personalities and trying to figure out how you're going to balance this thing and also funding. And it's always, your mind's like going over a million things. And I hear in the background, mind the gap, really loud, right? I don't know what they're talking about. I thought it's gap jeans or who knows what. I get on the tube, I go there, we have this big, session. It's working out great at the end, but still a lot of things to work out. There's always details. I get back onto the tube. I get ready to get off onto the platform and I hear, mind the gap. And this time I almost kill myself because it was like a gap of 1.5 feet. I could have died, right? But I knew this was empowerment evaluation. Watch this. On the one side, there's something called the theory of action. That's the espoused theory of the organization. Reach maybe has them too, where, ma and apple pie, equity, trying to do all the right things. That's one side of an organizational theory. The other side is called the theory of use. It's what actually happens, what you actually observe. And in life, most of us noticed that what we say we're about as an organization isn't always the same as what we do. In empowerment evaluation, you're trying to mind the gap between those two things and then close the gap at the same time. And the idea is to basically, you're trying to have people walk their talk. You see what I mean? Very, very powerful. And I'll do what Katrina's doing also, which is take some snapshots we can put up on the web, by the way. I encourage you to do that as much as you can. Put them on because it'll make people see how friendly and straightforward this is and how they can use it themselves. But anyway, those are the only theories guiding this. Process use, where the more that people are doing it themselves, the more they have a sense of ownership and they're going to follow through on the findings and recommendations. Whereas we can do it externally and be brilliant and do a wonderful job, but there's not going to be a lot of follow through necessarily, unless it's a stick or whatever. But the reality is once the money goes or what's our expertise, we leave nothing behind unless we help build that capacity. In these two theories, it's just a matter of helping the organization walk its talk, and you're minding the gap, and you're closing the gap between what the organization says they're about and what they do in reality. Anyway, then I go over some basic concepts. I won't go over them all tonight, but it deals with the focus. This is on our work in Stanford School of Medicine, focusing on evidence, critical friend, culture of evidence, cycles of reflection, community of learners. In a nutshell, what you're doing is helping people know, just in the background, that you're focused on always collecting evidence. You have a critical friend like us to be able to be a coach and help facilitate the process, but they're in charge. We're going to be developing a culture of evidence because I want to be asking you tonight, why did you give something a 3? Why did you give it a 6? So I'll be asking you to document what it is in your mind that says that you give it that rating. The cycles of reflection and action are just, guess what? Analysis is reflection. And you think about what it is you've done and whether it's worked and whether the data merit moving forward. And then you act on it. And then you monitor that. And once again, it's cycles of action and reflection and action. In the process, we all become a community of learners because none of us, including me, know everything. We're learning together. And ideally, we become reflective practitioners where we're all thinking about how to improve what we're doing on a routine basis. I just want to mention this one, and I'll highlight this one as well, and then I'll go right to the 3 steps. The coaching part is important because I get into some big argument with some other, like Michael Scriven, some other colleagues of mine that said, David, you can't have a coach in real life. What do you mean in evaluation? You have to make it life on your own. You can't, got to go your own way. No one's going to help you. So I went home thinking, well, he's got some good point. Maybe I'm being too idealistic or something. And I thought, wait a minute, my daughter has a coach for volleyball. I would not let her do pole vaulting with a horse without a coach. I was only going from the parking lot to my office. I needed to get some exercise. So I went back to a gym, but I'm not crazy. I didn't want to ruin my back. I got a coach. Anyway, you get the story. But we all have coaches and we should have coaches. So he's wrong. There's nothing wrong with having a coach as a critical friend to help people do their evaluation. So as I went home and thought about it, I realized, no, he's crazy. This is something we should. You think you're going to let your students in the med school go off and do whatever they want to do without having to be coached? That's not reality. A financial advisor is a coach. Anyway, not to overplay the point, but it's really critical to know that we are going to be playing a role of being critical friends. This is Linda Delaney. She works with me in Arkansas, and she plays that role, which is they may believe in the nature of the program, but still ask critical questions to ensure an honest and constructive critique and self-assessment. And then I only highlight these briefly, that there are principles guiding empowerment evaluation, and they focus on improvement, community ownership. And I'll tell a little story, not tonight, but I'll tell a little story they'll get a kick out of on inclusion. I'll just mention it to you so you know it's coming. Democratic participation. It's about dealing with social justice issues, respecting community knowledge, respecting and valuing evidence-based strategies, but adapting, not always adopting those. And if you're not doing some degree of capacity building, then we're probably not doing empowerment evaluation. It's about organizational learning. And the fundamental part of empowerment evaluation is accountability. Did you do it? People love the approach. They embrace it. It's wonderful. But you know what? It's also about, did you do it? What did you promise? What'd you produce? So it's not just a feel-good kind of approach. I will mention briefly the inclusion thing just to highlight how important some of these principles are. And I only mentioned very briefly tonight because we don't have a lot of time, but this is one of the stories I'll tell in a little bit more detail when I do the workshop, and you'll get a kick out of it. So I'll just tell you briefly. When I was the president of the American Evaluation Association, as I said, I introduced this as my approach, and I got someone very well known to help introduce it for me or with me. And I explained it's a double Nobel laureate, and I've read his work as a kid, and I still work as an adult. I could spend all morning and all night talking about this guy and introducing him. But instead, you know what? Let me introduce to you Dr. Albert Einstein. Well, people thought, David, have you been in California a little too long? I mean, didn't he die quite a few years ago? So I hired an actor. And he had the long hair and he had the sweater and he's just moving his hands like crazy. And I taught him for 6 months about evaluation and empowerment evaluation. And everyone said, he is brilliant. He was fantastic. Now, here's the side story I tell during the workshop also. And it's a true story, by the way. I hired this guy. He did a fantastic job. But you know those remote mics you have on your hip and then you can walk around and talk and that sort of thing? That's what we had, of course, because he's an actor. Well, it wasn't working right. So every other word was coming out like this, in and out, all the way. I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm putting my career in the line because I just first introducing this thing. They're very critical colleagues. And I wanted this whole thing to be like a exciting new venture for how to think about doing evaluation, et cetera. And it's going to fail because they can't possibly hear what he's saying, right? Well, my dad taught me a lot of things. So I saw a crack on the side of the plastic while he was standing talking, right? And I go, I know what to do. Now, keep in mind, there are thousands of people, very, pretty I wouldn't say conservative, but I'd say they're very traditional evaluators listening to all this stuff. And I grab a hold of the plastic and do it as tight as I can, because I knew if I did that, the batteries would connect, right? And sure enough, it worked. So yay, I solved the problem, right? No. Think about it. I'm in a three-piece suit. It's in Texas, so I have a cowboy hat on because it was the motif of that year. And then all my board members had stars, what do you call it? Gold stars, for badges, so you'd know who to go to. So I'm dancing behind this guy who's not stopping, moving like crazy. Guess what? Now they're not paying attention to what he has to say because they're watching me dance behind him because I'm holding his hips for the thing. And if I let go, it's every other word, right? So Sandip gets it. It's like, this is a mess, right? Well, I'm friends with all sorts of folks around the world and different things. And there's one guy at the meetings that everyone bolts away from because he likes to talk about computers 24/7, right? I like him. I don't know, he's from a small town. I'm from a small town. I like talking to him. Who is the one person, this is thousands of people, who come to the front podium with an old-fashioned mic with a cord? Him. Inclusion. So I tell these stories to highlight the fact that one of the important things about empowerment evaluation is inclusion, because your weakest link could be the person who saves the day. Anyway, I won't tell you all the stories tonight, but I just want to give you a feel for, I tell stories while I'm going over these different steps. And I say, don't worry, they're summarized in Japanese, because you ask, are they done in different languages and cultures? Yep. We have the principles all set out for high, medium, low, and that sort of thing. But let me just briefly mention 3 steps, and then we'll go to Google Sheets tonight. I take people through the 3 steps of empowerment evaluation. The first one, and it can be a rocky road, I should say. This is, I was still going up to Mount Everest, not always smooth. By that time, we're past the tree line. So it's just rocky. Anyway, I explained to everyone that the first step, whether it's done in face-to-face or remotely, is the mission. It'll be, what do you think is the meaning or the mission of REACH? And I know you already have one, and we respect what exists, but I want to know what you're thinking right now. And we're going to ask everyone to have key items. And we're going to do this on Google Sheets in a minute. I just want to, this is what I do first with the slides so everyone knows where we're going. And I explain how it's democratic, it's transparent, we get the group values, and you honor the existing mission, but you go with the energies in the room. The giving voice and meaning I mentioned are things that we all know about, which is, a quick example of this is you say something interesting or important at a meeting and you're ignored. Or you're put down for that comment. Or my very favorite, someone says exactly what you just said, who has more stature than you, and everyone goes, what a good idea. Now that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Katrina knows what I'm talking about. Yep, Roland knows them. That's not being allowed to give voice or make meaning. In empowerment evaluation, you are compelled to be heard, as you'll see when we go through the steps. Then I explain we have 2 parts to taking stock. The first part is really just a prioritization, where basically when you're doing face-to-face, I give everybody 5 dots. With the 5, we're gonna generate as many as activities as the group thinks are important or critical to accomplishing that mission. And they could be teaching, funding, communication, whatever they think. There's no wrong answer. It's just brainstorming on what they think are the critical activities. Once again, it's like Sandip was talking about. You have these external things that people think are important. Well, I want to know what they think are the most important things to accomplish. And they list them all out. And there's no wrong answer. But then I give everyone 5 dots. In this case, we'll have just little 1 markers you'll see in the Google Sheets, but it's the same concept. And if you want, you can put all 5 in one. You can put 1 in one, you can put 2 in another one. But I explained to everyone, you can't rip them in half, bless you. You can't rip them in half, you can't sell them, all that sort of thing. And believe me, people do crazy stuff like this. They love these dots. And I say, and everyone goes, David, it's not very quantitative. I go, just count the dots. Whatever got the most dots, that we're going to then transfer into a spreadsheet like this. And we'll take the top 10 of whatever number we generate, and we'll put them in a spreadsheet. Then this is a critical part of the empowerment evaluation process that we'll do in the larger workshop. There's nothing confidential. Everyone puts their initials on the top. That's mine, DF. We have another colleague of mine over there, and then another person. And they rate on a 1 to 10 scale. 10, everything's working perfectly in communication. 1, awful, the pits. And we actually put our numbers there. And we're going to do that in Google Sheets also tonight, just to make sure we have a good feel for how that works. Then once we've done that with each of these categories, teaching, funding, product development, we total an average across. so I can see what the group thinks across. Now, if that's all we did, we could have done a survey for that. So that's not enough. I go, okay, I'll explain why I gave it a 3. The evidence, we have overlapping meetings. We never have agendas. We have last minute meetings out of nowhere with no sense of people's schedules or anything like that. I go on and on and on. SEC happens to be a secretary. She says she's a better social scientist than me. She has the actual record to showing the actual overlap in meetings and the scheduler. She elbows me because, you know, Machiavellian politics, organizational stuff. You want to make sure you don't have only the highest person, the lowest person. You're closer to him. Would you mind asking why he gave it a 6? Who is it that gave it a 6? The dean. So I go, why? Everyone thinks we're miscommunicating, very poor communicators, et cetera, et cetera. And you heard all the evidence. He says, David, from my perspective as the dean, we communicate very well compared to the entire institute. If we didn't just do a dialogue, we never would have known that was his perspective and where we stood in relation to the larger institute. In the middle of this, we created external and internal communication. It's normal evaluation, we never do that, right? You stick just with that term, you don't change your variables. This made it more precise. It also made sure that we knew what we were talking about. And when we were talking about this, we had a better idea of where it was coming from. We did this not through every single one. When we do this in our exercise, we'll do it with, I usually go high ones and low ones. Then I do ones that are the same because they can see that there are different reasons for the 5, the same 5, etc. But let me show you this other one. It's very important. That's a situation where we were just talking past each other. But if we didn't have a dialogue, we wouldn't have known it. It would have been lost if it was just a survey. So we do the same thing for product development. Those are those brochures you have to help people know about the graduate program, or letting announcements or nighttime sessions for people to learn about the program. I gave it a 1 because I thought nothing was being done to help promote what's going on, and that we weren't getting enough students in the program, and it's just, you know, pathetic. Secretary gave it a 4. She knew more than me, but not much. Who gives it an 8? The dean. What a shock, right? But in this case, I said, why do you give it an 8? And he explains, he does over 1,000 brochures a month. He does public TV spots. He does public radio spots. He does night. I had one office, seriously, no more than I'd say 15 feet away from his. I had no idea, no clue. In this case, it became a learning activity. I now knew, number one, he was failing at communicating internally about what he was doing. I also learned now I have a resource that I didn't even know about, only just right across the hall. So sometimes the empowerment evaluation dialogue that's going to happen in this, when we all do this, becomes something that is enlightening. And usually the elephant in the room emerges rather than just the assessment of how well we're doing. Anyway, I'll keep on moving quickly, but the point is I then average the averages as well. So now this is called really the baseline. Now we know where we are. Keep in mind, this is actually abbreviated version of a real example. They gave themselves a 4.25. Think about it. If I said tonight, I give everybody a 4.25 on what they've done, you go, David, stay in California. You don't know us, you don't know what you're talking about. If you give it to yourself, you go, David, how can you help us? You see how it just changes the whole nature of the relationship? Anyway, this becomes the baseline. I'll keep on going quickly through so you have a better feel for it, but I go more slowly when we go through the exercise with everyone. The last stage, after you've done mission, taking stock, which has prioritization, and then rating and dialogue, is what do you want to do with this? Well, you want to plan for the future. Normal evaluation, you've already done. In empowerment, you kind of just begun, because now I want the group to come up with their goals, and they have to be tied to their taking stock. So one of the things that came up was communication. What's your goal? It should be simple. Improve communication, not hard. Your strategies, this is important, need to be tied to the evidence we just heard. So the evidence was we have overlapping meetings. Well, let's watch it and make sure we don't have overlapping meetings. The evidence was no agendas. So now let's have agendas. Because you see, I could come up with a lot of brilliant ideas. Like, instead of, you were mentioning that before, you have these external things over here that are, you know, indicators, everything else. Wonderful, they could be brilliant, but they're irrelevant until you know what the insider thinks, the community folks think. In this case, you take from the evidence of what they said was important as your strategies. And then we talk about what's credible evidence. Anyway, that's a quick wave. I'll go through this process. Tonight we won't go through all the steps. I mean, all the examples, but then we come up with a dashboard I mentioned to them. In the dashboard, after we come up with what we want to do to improve things, we will come up with a baseline of where we were, goals about where you want to go, milestones for every quarter, and then the only thing that they have to keep track of is their actual performance and compare it with the milestones and the goals. And it looks something like this. For a tobacco prevention program we have going in Arkansas, they had smoke-free parks, one of them, so that's your baseline in the community. The goals were to have 4 in the year. So you just put 4 all the way through every quarter. The goal is 4. Each quarter we just divided by 4. The first we want to have 1 more cumulative is 2, 1 more is 3, 1 more is 4. Once we agreed that that was reasonable, all we had to do from that point on is say, how many did you do? And first one we did 0, we didn't slap anybody in the wrist. We said, who knows how to do this? We brought them in, they showed us what they did, they adapted it, and sure enough, they got 1. Then we learned more, they got 3. So we could make mid-course corrections before it's too late at the end of the year. This way, if it's not working, we know, all of us know, because we're all looking at this. They're monitoring themselves, we're looking at this, everyone's involved. Anyway, you get the idea, and then you can map it out on a bar chart like this, etc. And then these are just more examples of the dashboard. My point is you can reach all sorts of new heights, but from our languaging perspective, the taking stock is the baseline, plans for the future are the intervention, interim measures are the milestones, and the reflection and action are the mid-course corrections you make. Then we come back 3 months from now or 6 months, whatever it may be, and we do this again. And then we have a second data point to compare. Now, this is really important. When we do plans for the future and say one of the topics is communication, I go, whoever's there, I go, Sandip, you mentioned communication the most. Would you mind taking the lead on that? Doesn't mean you have to do it all. Anyone else who discussed it and thought it was important, please connect with Sandip. But the next time we have a meeting, not an evaluation meeting, a meeting, I ask, Sandip, where are we on the communication thing? And you highlight what's going on. We have just institutionalized evaluation. See what I mean? That's how simple and transparent this is. You've now turned it into what they do for part of their program operations, not something that's going to be a separate meeting on evaluation or anything like that. Boom. And it also improves accountability because instead of letting it go by, exactly, you know what I mean, Sandip, exactly. Otherwise, if you don't say anything at that critical juncture, no one then follows through. But if you have that name accountability, boom, continues. Like what you were talking about before, about us having this team to make sure this is monitored. You made sure we all had these roles. That's what we're going to do in empowerment, is exactly that. Because otherwise, you know, for the best of intentions, people kind of like float off in their own direction. So that third phase, the taking stock, we're going to mention, oh, who wants to take the lead on this? You know, whatever the topic is, funding, communication, whatever they come up with for their assessment. And then the next meeting that they have within reach in this case is going to be, where are we on that? And it just makes it part of program planning. Anyway, I just want to highlight that as a critical point. In the session, not tonight, I go over case examples in Arkansas, Hewlett-Packard, Stanford, so they can see it operates in many different venues, in many different situations. And the thing I will highlight tonight is simply, and we work in pretty desolate areas, is that we use the same process wherever we are. You have the assessment taking stock in the red. We have an intervention, plans for the future. And guess what? They all look a lot better the second time we look at it. Guess what? They don't always look as good the third time because people get better at this. So then it's more up and down. And that's okay. That's what evaluation is for. In this case, I won't go into all the details, but we actually reduced the level of folks that were at the 25th percentile from 59% of the entire population operating at that level to only 38. It's a massive change considering no one else was able to do that. And we're not experts linguistically or anything else, just in evaluation. Anyway, I won't go over all the examples here, but this is the tribal digital village where they did the same sort of thing. And we had the benediction by the tribal leaders on the right-hand corner. And it's the same exact process. But in this case, we emphasized pictures. Get permission to take pictures, but this is a picture of me teaching my class while we're doing a video conference with Native Americans in San Diego. Hewlett-Packard thought this picture was worth $15 million. Why? That had face validity. It was the outcome they wanted, which is to bridge the digital divide. They couldn't have seen a better way to express it. So we should take pictures with permission as much as possible, because you never know what's going to be the selling point, the convincing point for folks. Could be test scores, could be pictures. In this case, when I worked in the School of Medicine as a director of evaluation, we transformed the curriculum and we showed, and I don't recommend this, but we showed statistical significance for making that transformation. Why do we do this? Because that was the language they needed in medicine to show that was credible, and we got into an article about it in academic medicine. I don't recommend it because it's a massive waste of time, but some people need that. And you can, there are many different, we have to speak the language of power. Whatever the community is that the powerful folks that we're working with need to hear, we need to learn that language and translate what we're doing in that regard. Most people understand this one. It's called money. This is return on investment. And in tobacco, if you look at each of the individual groups we work with throughout the state, women's group, the Asian Pacific group, et cetera, none of them look very impressive in terms of how many kids they got to stop smoking. But when you translate that into money, and we got a memorandum of agreement and pull us all together, guess what? Cumulatively, we saved the state over $84 million in excess medical costs. Trust me, people listened when they heard that. So some of it is doing the work and getting people to do the work and understand and move towards their goals. Some of it's our job to help translate what that means. And that's why we all have to keep our imagination and our mind going on how to make sure that it's a powerful language of power that we're speaking when we're helping folks. I only highlight this because I'm just trying to show there are many ways of communicating when we're done with different parts. This is just a highlight. We also use rubrics. I won't go over it tonight in detail, just to know that I like to define what we're doing in this class, in this school. I also have them do their own self-assessment. I have them do peer assessment. I assess them, of course. And the irony or the interesting part is we use Google Sheets, which we'll use briefly tonight. Don't worry, I won't spend too much more time. I want you to walk you through it just to define what we mean as we go through this process. Anyway, this I'll highlight very briefly when we go through the workshop. We don't really need too much of it tonight, but I also use Google Forms just to introduce them the idea that they can use a free online survey software that we can then help them with later. That sort of plants the seed. In this case, by the way, the self-assessment, the peer assessment, and my own assessment all aligned, showing that you can do your own internal assessment and it's just as credible as an external one. They actually match beautifully. Anyway, you get the idea. My point is, this is my family up until going to Mount Everest Base Camp. We made it. My point is you can reach your goals and even exceed your aspirations when you go on this journey together. And that's what we're going to do. And then I mentioned that there are technological tools of the trade, just briefly, that there are many tools that we can talk about later in the year. If people are interested, I'd like to share information more at a different session about blogs, collaborative sites, YouTube, video conferencing, using Canva, beautiful report writing software that China, you like this a lot when I did this one, this software. That's how I did the proposals and stuff. I think it helps revolutionize how we produce our stuff. I'll just mention it to folks briefly. And also I'll mention if people are interested later, they won't have to do a session, don't worry, right away, on using Verbella, just to let them know I'm available and happy to walk them through and do another workshop on this if they want. It's not part of the contract. I'm just going to do it in addition, if they're interested, on how to use avatars. That's me and one of my colleagues, Linda, to have meetings online remotely with a sense of physical space, not just the Zoom that you get Zoom fatigue on. Anyway, I'll just mention that briefly and then references. So I mentioned the different references and books that are available, radio information, blah, 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 all this stuff. And that's it for that. So now we're going to end this part and we're going to move into Google Sheets. So everyone move to Google Sheets and we'll spend 10 more minutes. Don't worry, I'm not going to walk you through an hour or anything like that. But I just want to make sure you had a good firm feel for what I'm going to do with the slides because it's the conceptual foundation for what we're going to do on the Google Sheets, which is just a tool to be able to do it remotely. Is that everyone okay? It's good?
Yeah, David, before you move on to the Google Sheets, I just had some, thank you for this. This is brilliant. And this is exactly what we're trying to do in the Loan Alliance project.
Beautiful.
And you know the fit very well, right? So what I just wanted to clarify.
Say again, last part again?
So I just wanted to clarify a couple of points. I think,
Yep, go ahead.
where am I? Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to see that, the political economy of the
Rahul, you're muted.
I think you got muted again. You're going out again.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the political economy of the people that we are going to work with, how important is self-assessment of the parts of the process? Because we can talk about empowerment evaluation as a tool for the allies team implementing the project. So as I told you in the beginning, the allies team is a small group across 4 states. We have 18 to 20 people. But the people who are actually delivering and doing the work, the champions that we meet in the TB affected communities, that would end up being around 100, 120.
Yeah.
And those are the real people who are going to deliver that, right? For them, I know there are two points in the slides that I just picked up. One was on the independent judgment and collaborative judgment. And the second was one of the points where he showed in that slide of inclusion and the principles of empowerment evaluation, improvement.
Mhm.
Now, when you talk about improvement, we do talk about, are you talking about, I know you're talking about both the self part as well as the programmatic part, right?
Yeah.
Now, there is a unspoken political implication of improvement.
Mhm.
Once you have a donor funded project, improvement comes as sort of an obligation, right?
Yeah.
And thereby, there is this generic understanding within the community who are doing the work that we cannot talk about failures. And that's where I think you're going back to the subjectivity and the objectivity point. The reflections get impaired, right?
Yeah.
And to break it down to that level where you can speak about failures in terms of improvements,
Yeah.
or the real improvements, not like your indicator has gone up by 10%. I
Yeah.
mean, that's important.
Yeah.
But what if you could not achieve it? What happens?
Yeah.
Or why did it not happen? That reflection for the people who are not using Google Links, because now we are doing this online meetings, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get people on Zoom even, right?
Yeah.
So there are two questions that I want to follow up with. One is this entire context of subjectivity and objectivity when it comes to improvement of program indicators.
Mhm.
And the second one is the process where these people are not using Google Links.
Mhm.
And there is this critical friend or coach in terms of a position that we have created with the sub-recipients called the district strategist, who are at the helm of the implementation activities at the district level, who are managing a force of 10 people. And as the final impact of this methodology, this district strategist should be able to do this empowerment evaluation methodology with the 10 TB champions. And I am talking at the sub-block level here.
Yeah.
Okay, so these TB champions are not only sub-district, but they're sub-block level. So Google Sheets is nearly an impossibility because laptops are not there for these people. They don't have laptops.
Right.
Smartphones are a rarity.
Yeah.
But if this methodology gets imbibed, because we have budgeted meetings, programmatic meetings with the district strategists in a month where he meets the state TB champions, walks them through their difficulties, their programmatic work processes. And we want this methodology to be imbibed in those meetings to not only reflect on the programs, but also, the self-assessment bit. Because at the end, the vision of the project is to create this empowered cadre, right?
Yeah.
And when we say the empowered cadre, we are not talking about ourselves. I mean, we are important, of course. The district strategists are important, but more important are those 120 people doing this work, right? Because they get transitioned to the national TB control program.
Yeah.
And they are taken up by them.
Yeah.
So this is where I'm trying to visualize the process.
Yeah.
And also the philosophy behind improvement and objectivity and versatility, which Subrat, I think, also brought up in some ways.
Yeah. No, beautiful. Thank you for mentioning that. And keep in mind, when I'm doing work like in South Africa, we don't have any technology at all. We have gum and poster paper, and people maintain now some form of social distance, obviously, and separate themselves out. But this does not require, it's obviously easier and safer to have this remote technology, whether it's Zoom or Google Sheets or what have you. But there are many ways of doing this. Keep in mind, I work with artists also, okay, where they thought the number system, the Google Sheets and the spreadsheets in general were too mathematical, too much to deal with. So we drew a circle, and in the circle we had the word communication, and all we did is gave them something. In this case, it was red dots if things were going bad on one side, green dots on the other. That's all. It's not as analytical as a 1 to 10 and a spreadsheet, but it worked. And I would never say in front of everyone that's cluster analysis, but that's what it was. You can see visually right off the bat. So my point is, as we maneuver and walk into different groups, we may find that there are adaptations, but the concepts will be the same, whether we use it through Google Sheets, whether we use it with social distancing. There are many ways of communicating it to make sure that the basic concepts are there. And once again, that improvement, like you're asking about or mentioning, that we align this larger level external potentially view of what improvement is with what internal is, and what we also come to a consensus on what is credible evidence. See what I mean? And the consensus is the key word here, because I've worked at a lot of national reform movements where they want 90% agreement, 95, it's never going to happen in our lifetime. What I've learned is consensus is good because that just means, can you live with it? Is it close enough? And when we talk about evidence, we have everyone involved. We have community folks, we have policymakers or a designee, we have everyone, so they can say whether they think that's credible. So it can't be pulling the rug out from under any of us at the end. That's the key, is also making sure we have that involvement. Doesn't have to be perfect, but all the way through, so we keep everybody informed. That gets at the issue of how we define what we're talking about, because when we get to evidence, I don't want it to be just one form of evidence and that's it. It's got to be checked with a larger sense of what we're all being held accountable for. But it can't be just the external folks, and it can't be just the internal. It's that agreement that this is middle ground about that would be, that's logical and close enough. Is that sort of a good response or fair response to what you're asking about?
Yeah, it actually fits our purpose very, very perfectly, because what you're saying, that the homogeneity of evidence, and if you focus on one indicator and you say that this is what we want to get, then it becomes difficult rather than deciding together. And thanks to Katrina and team, we have that flexibility with respect to coming up with systems level indicators which are adapted to the geography, which are adapted to the context.
Yes.
And because quality of care in TB is something that people have not come up with a objective metric yet, right?
Yeah.
So we have parameters, but the metric itself can be decided by the team.
Beautiful.
And that's where the flexibility comes in. So it fits in perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. See, the more that they can help define what this is within the parameters they hold accountable for, they then own it. Number one, it's more realistic, it's more doable, and thus more sustainable. So that's why it's all rooted in that same concern. And the idea is, once again, not done in a vacuum, but within the context of what we're all being held accountable for anyway. But they're going to know much more about how to accomplish that and feel better about trying to solve something that's broken or not working anyway. No one wants to go back to work knowing something's not working, and they've been irritated by it forever, but they have a way of tackling it that also addresses the larger so-called objective interpretation of what improvement might be. So that's right in the money, right in the target as well. Let's navigate over there because I don't want to hold everyone too long today. Is that okay?
Sorry.
Yeah.
David, can I just ask one more question based on what Rahul just said? Because I think it's really important, because it's the actualization of the theory.
Yeah.
Are we also thinking about including TB patients that these champions are serving in this process?
If possible, yes. I just finished a project it's called Recovery Cafe. It's a place for homeless folks, substance abuse prevention, mental illness, a bunch of different things under one roof. It basically looks like a Starbucks. So it's a really nice, inviting place for folks, rather than the usual dingy place you put homeless folks and stuff like that, to show them that they mean something, they're valuable, and they teach each other how to improve their lives, etc. Well, at the empowerment evaluations I've had with them, and that was sponsored by US Department of Health and Human Services, SAMHSA's, substance abuse prevention stuff. We had Vince and some other people that were actually clients, homeless folks, substance abuse, to be able to say what they think in the middle of the process. And it was enlightening, because while everyone on staff felt, that we're doing a pretty darn good job, we have some problems here, people like Vince and others that were actually people who actually were patients at the place, or customers or clients, whatever you want to call them, said, what they thought really worked. They said it's called radical hospitality, where they really invite you and they're welcome, they're wonderful, it's fantastic. But they had these quality circle things where we're all supposed to get together and share stuff. And they're saying, that didn't really help me at all. And they had no idea. And it was often because of some reason, like They didn't have donuts. They didn't have whatever, something easily solvable. But the point is, from their subjective perspective, their worldview, they weren't being treated at that level of taking care of the basic sugar substance that they wanted. So they thought the whole practice of helping and counseling each other wasn't working. It didn't have to do with the counseling. It was a simple thing from their perception that was critical. So it was invaluable when they can, if you can have participants in there as well, if you can. I don't look for a perfect world, but it works better if you have that additional check on reality.
And is that what, Rahul, you're thinking also?
Katrina, I think at this point of time, yeah, I mean, the real stakeholders are the people with TB. But for the initial part of the project, let's first start with the TB champions. We should definitely, what David's saying is that, at the final end, those are the final stakeholders, and we should get their views on the process too.
Yeah, yeah, you can do you can do the stages, Raul, where you can have the champions first involved. And then,
yes.
And then you could have, for example, not to get ahead of the game, but when we get past the plans for the future, one thing might do online survey or face-to-face, but with distancing, for obvious reasons, surveying of folks with TB that are not champions on purpose to see what's working or not working. And then you may then incorporate them for the second wave or the third one when you do taking stock, whatever you're comfortable with. I've done this with breast cancer screening projects I've had. We had a big one in Newfoundland many years ago. In that case, the doctors didn't want to have any of the women come to see what was going on yet, because they didn't think their management information system was developed enough. They didn't want to be embarrassed that it's not quite refined, that they don't have all the answers. But for whatever reason, accidentally or whatever, we had 2 or 3 of the women, women who were going to go get breast cancer screening, attend an early session, one of our earlier sessions. And it was invaluable. Why? Because they said, and now the doctors were a little shocked because they didn't expect anybody from the outside to come in. But once they were in, they said things like, this is a marvelous system you have for breast cancer screening. We think it's fantastic. We would definitely take advantage of it. But we don't have money for babysitting or for the bus ride. If we didn't have that input from the patients themselves or potential patients, this massive multi-million-dollar management information system and the breast cancer screening, equipment would have been for nothing. So, because we wouldn't have known. So my point is, if we can get folks in at early stages, great. If it's better, it's safer and more comfortable a little later, whatever works. I'm just pointing out that the reason that I highlight this is not just because I like equity and fairness and all this other stuff. I'm just a practical person. The reality is they'll have some insight that goes, oh my gosh, I didn't think of that. And it could be something incredibly insignificant from our perspective, but a deal breaker for them as far as being able to make it. Anyway, that's why I throw it. But I'm okay with any way in which the reach feels comfortable doing it. I'm just explaining the highlights, the positive and negatives, and try to alleviate some of the fears or concerns about having someone too soon in there. But certainly we need to have champions and people familiar with it that have real direct experience working with reach in there, because they'll have some great insights that we need to, because remember, we're not going to only focus on negatives, on what's wrong. I want to hear what's going well so we can build on those strengths. So it's not just a matter of negativity. So anyway, hope that's helpful. Is that good? Okay, let's switch over now. And we only spend about 10 minutes, not long, on the Google Sheets. I just want you to get a feel for how that works. So let's move over. I'm going to exit over here, stop sharing the screen just for a second. And I'm going to go over to Google Sheets myself. Let me get over here. Give me a second. And everybody, I'll meet you over there. I'm going to go this and stop sharing just for a second. Let me get my Google Sheets going. And it's over here. There you go. Now I'm going to share the screen again. Let's see. Okay, just do my sharing this. And I'm going to CS over here. And I'll get onto the Google Sheets. And I'm over here. Now, can everyone see the Google Sheets right now? Where it says our names, it has Raul there and it has Sandip and has me over there. Can you see it? Okay, cool. Beautiful. Thanks. Let me take one more screenshot of all of us. 1 second, so I don't forget to do that. Sometimes I forget, and I want to do as much as we can, because this part of it is dissemination of what we're doing. It's like, so 1 second. So I like to record when I can, even though we're recording it, the Zoom session that we can share with folks who weren't able to make this. I like to also take shots for, LinkedIn and that sort of thing to help people realize this is not so complex. We can all do this. And we're using Zoom to do it as well as Google Sheets. Very simple. Anyway, first page, let me walk you through. And once again, I'm not going to take your whole day or anything like that, but I just want to, but thanks for all the questions because it's really helpful, gets us all on board with what the issues are. And, the frankness is what we need so we can deal with all the things that come up. And I don't have all the answers, I'll tell you. I just know a fair amount because I've been doing it for so long, that's all. So anyway, we have this Google Sheets and we let everyone know they can make a copy of this sheet. Everyone here can make a copy and everyone else and do their own empowerment evaluation with this by simply doing file over here. See what it says that? And they simply make a copy, rename it, get rid of the data that we're going to have in it, and they can create their own. You'll see why it's important to mention that, because why should they reinvent the wheel? I can help create this thing and it's free. It just helps people work with it. Anyway, so as a test to make sure everyone could get connected, I just asked everyone to just put their name and their email. This is what we need to do before the actual workshop, because then we don't want to deal with all the mechanical problems of did you get connected or how do you get connected during it. We don't have time. So that's why I asked you to do this before, just to show you that's what we want them to do. Does that sound okay? It just makes things smoother. So in this, you'll have the mission, the two parts I talked about with taking stock. In this case, I broke it down a little bit more to make it more manageable, plans for the future, and even monitoring. So it's all here in the spreadsheet. If we go to the first one, mission, I'm going to do an extremely abbreviated example. So watch this. Feel free to type in what you think the mission is of REACH. Yeah, just type in on your own on this Google Sheets. Take a second. Yep. Try not to go over each other. Just sometimes we give people assignments of numbers, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. But tonight we're just going to go quickly over this and just add wherever you can. So I put mine in right over there. Go ahead. Yep, keep going. I see. Depending on bandwidth, we'll have slight delays and no big deal. So it'll slowly come through. But go ahead. To cure and prevent TB. This is beautiful. See, help eliminate TB, improve quality of care and services in TB affected communities. Beautiful. See how simple and straightforward this is? There's nothing too complex. It's the same as if we did this on a poster sheet, a paper with magic marker, with better handwriting than mine, and we're getting all these key things. And what we'll do with all this, by the way, is this is mental scaffolding, getting people, their minds ready to do taking stock. A lot of times people say, just fill out the survey or just evaluate this, but you need people to take a little time to mentally get their heads into the mission, into what we're talking about before jumping into it. And that's what this is about. So this is an example where maybe Sandip and I or someone else in REACH would work with Raul or someone else, or one of us, and we would later, not now, turn this into a paragraph or two. We don't slow the process down. You do the wordsmithing later. You have to remember the facilitation side of empowerment evaluation or any evaluation. You do this, and then we quickly move into the prioritization, and then the rating and dialogue, and then plans for the future. But this gives us the core of it. See how cool this is? Strengthen the support that those affected by TB receive, to cure and prevent TB, improve quality of care services in TB affected communities. This is beautiful. Keep on going a little bit longer. We won't do an in-depth one tonight, but this is fantastic actually. And later what I'll do is I'll save this one for us. I'll erase this for the rest of the group. They can start fresh. But this is actually very useful. So I add just a couple more things that I'm going to walk you through very extremely abbreviated version of the process, just to show you how simple and straightforward this is going to be. Good, just add 1 or 2 more things, and then we'll keep moving along. I see 2 more coming in, so I'll just wait for a second. But this is perfect. Look at this. See, look how good this is already. Increased TB diagnosis and successful treatment. Is this cool or what? This is in such a, look at, we're just doing this in a few minutes and look what we're getting. Can you imagine what we're going to get if we spend like a half an hour or more on this with the whole group? Now, a lot of times, keep in mind, we're particularly good at this because we have background in evaluation and that sort of thing, program, our development, operations. A lot of folks think in terms of only activities, which will come next, but we're already thinking larger level, which is what you want the group to be thinking at this stage. Beautiful. Work with communities to strengthen, yep, to eliminate TB. Fantastic. All right, I'm going to artificially cut it off. I won't do it that quickly, of course. When we are doing it, we'll take probably a half an hour to an hour sometimes just doing the mission. We'll see how it goes. Because sometimes it takes people time to percolate. I'm guessing we could probably do it maybe in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on the group, but it can take up to an hour, just so you know how much time we're talking about. So we go from this, and we have the mission. And once again, we do not write it up now. Later, a couple of us will sit together and we'll try to turn this into a paragraph, and we send it out to the group afterwards and say, does this sound right? And then if they don't like it, they say what wording they want changed. They can't just say, I don't like it. And then we revise until we get a consensus, as I mentioned before. Can you live with this? Doesn't have to be perfect. Later, you can have a subgroup wordsmith this to death for pamphlets and other purposes, but for our evaluation purposes, we just want to get people's mind in this zone and put it on the table. So we go from here. This is all beautiful, by the way. Thanks for doing that so quickly. We go to prioritization, this sheet. And this one, I want you to list what you think are the key activities to accomplishing that goal. And just start jotting down what the goals are. Try to not go over each other if you can. Try to find a space and just start typing in it under activities, yeah? And just write down a couple. We won't be exhaustive. I just want you to get comfortable with the process. We'll be much slower with everyone else, of course. Yep, building TV champions, beautiful. Keep going.
David, why wouldn't you just use the activities that have been outlined in an annual work plan here?
Usually what happens is ones that are in the work plan have been so reified and so they're not as dynamic or organic as something coming out of someone and what they feel is really important when you sort of put them out there. It's like saying, writing up a really detailed program assessment. You have all this methodological detail and that sort of thing, instead of what do you think is at the heart of it? And this really gets at a process of, quite frankly, reduction. What we're doing is we're taking the big picture of mission, which is gigantic, equity and reducing and eliminating TB. Then we're going to, what are the key activities to be able to do that? And later we're going to then talk about those in detail. When we get to plans for the future, we're only going to pick 3 out of the 10 that we evaluate because we're reductionists. We're going to do only the more focused things. So we're asking the same thing verbally in this case. What do you think from all you know and what you've written out are the most important things? It'll reduce it even further. So the trick behind this whole thing, in a sense, if there's a trick, is that you're taking a gigantic, impossible mission in existence, and you're making it doable with a greater dose effect because you're making it narrower and more narrow. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it just seems that, like, I guess it depends on who's in the room, but it seems like they've spent the time and energy in articulating what their work plan is. And, so if I, for example, think, well, out in left field, it's about, creating a digital space for people to communicate. And that really isn't in their work plan. They don't even have the license to work outside of it. So that's why I feel like, I get the value of sky is the limit thinking, but I also feel that you've already done a lot of your thinking and you're working in a parameter, quite frankly, in a box. And that what is that parameter? It's your work plan. It's what the project is trying to do. I could go into lab diagnostics, for example, but that's not what this project specifically is trying to do. So I'm trying to say, like, why aren't we putting up some of those parameters which perhaps, for example, Rahul would know very well, but in this context, others in the room may not know
Right.
in that scenario.
Yeah, what will happen is if we don't go through this part of the process, my experience has been that if there isn't a sense of what the group thinks, and this is how it's going to come out in a second, you'll see when we do our little dots over here, people will go off and do their own thing anyway. And it'll always be a distraction and a weakness for the organization. Once they see, for example, when we do our prioritization in a minute, that they're an outlier, it's much harder for them to pursue that regardless of their belief at the time that that was a legitimate thing that fit under the umbrella that they wrote under their activities. You'll see in a sense, in a second, how that gets done just in a simple prioritization process where we put our 5 dots on there. Because I see a lot of organizations where they have it all listed out, but really that was just on, a lot of it was on paper, and they don't really have a sense of what the group thinks and how much, it doesn't place them in perspective. They don't have a context of where they stand. And it's really important to see where they fit in, and they can realize that they actually are part of a larger group that believes this in a strong way. And what part really is a minor part of the group, maybe a powerful part of the group, a minor, smaller part that has that and that same level of respect for that activity. You'll see in a second when they do the prioritization. But very, very important, because so much of what I deal with is I go through, like, thousands of pages of stuff that's on paper, and really it's took years to put together some stuff I read through and work with folks on. And really, they were only the top 6 or 7 things that people really thought were going to make an impact and work on it. And they get distracted and reinterpret these other things that are on paper, technically legit. It refocuses everyone. So you'll see as we go through this part of the process, but your point's really well taken. But my experience is that there's always that what would you call, sort of that gap between what is on paper versus what people are feeling and moving towards. And they need to know how they fit within the community in terms of people's prioritization, their sense of what's the most important for them as a group to monitor. It doesn't mean that, I should emphasize, it doesn't mean the other things on the list are not going to be dealt with. These are the things that they think they should deal with as a group from this point on. Not that other things shouldn't be taken care of and aren't being taken care of by the organization and that are not required. But this is a smaller set of folks really focused in on key variables. I guess I probably didn't emphasize that enough. That's not the only thing that's going to be done. Sometimes people will think something critical is not even listed in here because they already think it's going to be done and is monitored and implemented really, really well. So it's not even going to be on the list, even though it's an extremely important thing. These are the things that the group thinks really the group should always be on top of to move forward with. Is that helpful? Make a note of that. I should have emphasized that earlier. A second. Thanks. That's important things for the group to manage as a whole. It doesn't mean that.
I would just say for this to really be helpful,
yeah.
I think it is really critical that everyone who is sitting on this core team, or whoever the core team is that you compile,
yeah.
Is well familiar with what REACH's work plan, what the Allies work plan is, and
yeah.
has seen it or understands what the project is trying to do.
Yes.
And understands where their sort of emphasis is in this kind of spectrum of TB.
Yes, yes, yes. I agree 100%. That's why I include that in part of the proposal. I didn't want to be too preemptive or anything like that or prescriptive, but I thought the things I read that already existed needed to be framed as something we all take into consideration as a priority. So I agree 100%. That's where we would make sure everyone's up to date on exactly what's already been in place, and make sure that when we're then going through this, we have a feel for what existed, but now you'll see what things are going to be prioritized even within that context. But thanks for mentioning that. We can make sure that everyone is familiarized in case they're not familiar with all the work plan part. Because a lot of the core team is going to be right here. But anyway, thanks for mentioning that. Now, I'm going to keep on going, jumping through if that's okay, so people have a feel for. Now, what people can do is I sometimes just separate into brainstorming list, and then I do the DOS. Sometimes I just do this, but I want you now to go, for the sake of time, put your initials up here. See, that's mine, DF. Put your initials over here. just pick a slot, E, F, G, whatever. And then what I want you to do, you only have 5 dots. That means like 5 ones. So in my case, I would do something like, I'm going to put 1 here. You can only have 5 total. Oh, don't put your initials down this low for SP. Everyone's initials go up on top under the D, E, F, G, H over here. Beautiful, thanks. And by the way, people will make mistakes as they go through 1 to 10. Don't worry about it. Just have them fix it, no big deal. Anyway, this can't add up to more than 5 from me. So I've got 1 here, community outreach. I want to do governance and I want to create a feedback loop for communities. I want to do 3 for that one. You can pick 1 for each. You can pick 2 for whatever you want to do. I can't do more than 5. So now I only have 1 left. 3 and 1. I want, oh, I like the champions. 1 second. Strengthening public systems. Be a little bit, just not too much longer. Yep. We'll stop in about 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Building TB champions. Then let me see. 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. So go ahead, put your numbers down. You have 1 each. And it should add up to 5 total as you go down here. So pick what you think are the most important things to evaluate as a group from this point on. Yep, go ahead. Yep, perfect. Yep, perfect. Yep, RD's got 1 there. And what you'll notice as we're going through this is you look on the far left where it says total, it's totaling the number for us already. That's why I say people might want to copy the spreadsheet, because instead of having to create these formulas themselves, it's already done. Yep. Beautiful, beautiful. 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. 2, 3, 4. Yep. See that everyone just 5 total, and you got it. So that's it. I'm going to walk through quickly. Of course, I'm going to move us along just because I don't want to take us too much more time, but you're getting exactly the idea. Now look at this. If you look on the left, as I say earlier, under total, you now know that the top one is going to be creating, I think it's 7, creating a feedback loop that communities can use for their TB services. The next one will be building TB champions. The next one will be community outreach, and so on and so forth. And you pick up the, we would normally pick up the top 10. Tonight, we're just going to pick up the top 3 just so I can show you quickly how it works. I see an 8 for that one. So you would copy this, like this, and we're going to bring this into the sheet on rating. And on rating, I'm going to put over here, that, and then I'm going to go back over to our brainstorming list and get just the top 3 for now. We'll pick normally the top 10, as I say before, but we just, for the sake of time, we're going to move on more quickly. This one is building TB champions. That'd be the next one. Copy that. And then we bring that over here, like so, like this. And I'm just going to do one more for tonight. But normally we pick the top 10 items. So I got the 8, I've got the 5, and I also want the 4, community outreach. That's all we'll do for tonight. But see how quick this is? Or straightforward and very open. There's nothing gaming about it or secretive. It's all out in the open, every part of this part, which I like. The transparency is very helpful. Now, what I want you to do here, let's move over to this sheet. Sorry to move us quickly, but I know it's taking a little more time than we had planned. So thanks for everyone hanging in there. Now what we would do is rate it. Creating a community feedback loop. This is how well are we doing, not how important it is. How well are we doing? And I would give it, say, I'll give it a 6 from what I know. Put your initials on top here like I have, and then just start rating. what you think. Building TV champions. I'm not as familiar, so I would say we're doing actually. I have read a little bit, so actually I would say from what I know, it's probably it could be better. I think I'm going to give it a 4 or 5. I'm not sure yet. I have to think about it. But start rating yours for these top 3. Beautiful. Yep, beautiful. Go ahead, keep on doing the ratings. I'm just going to do these top 3. And you can already see what's going on here. As you're doing this, I've got it, the rating is being averaged on our left over here. You see? So it's just automatic. We don't have to go into worrying about all the logistics of all this stuff. Keep going. Let's add a couple more, and I'll just show briefly a little bit about the dialogue. We'll do a little bit on plans for the future, and then we'll stop for tonight. So that's because the monitoring thing will be another session where I'll show you what we'll do with that another time. Let's just make sure we're all comfortable with this stage of it. But thanks for taking the time. Yeah.
David, as I haven't worked very intricately within the program itself, I don't know, how aware I am and how much I'd be able to,
That's
kind of rank these.
You just give it your best impression. Remember,
Okay.
the subjective perception of what's going on here is as important as the reality. It's very important for us to know folks' views who are not as familiar with the process of the program, because we want to know how they are perceiving what's going on here, as well as folks who are intimately familiar with it. See what I mean? Because you might be perceiving something that, wow, we didn't know that's how we come across. We need to know that. Even if we don't agree with it, we now know we better do a better job at communicating what we do. See what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to do, I think also I agree with that, and I'm also going to do something like this. And normally what I would do now is I go, Katrina, well, you gave it, or I'd say, I do it by, I wouldn't say necessarily the name because I wouldn't know everyone's name, but I go KC, why a 2 for community outreach? And go ahead, just briefly, what would you give it a 2 for?
Well, I think we haven't mobilized communities the way we can to really engage in, we've engaged them in the awareness raising, but not in terms of how do you support patients or people who feel they're being affected by it.
Beautiful. You see how important that was? In that one sentence we now know for plans for the future, our emphasis is going to be supporting how do you support patients. You see what I mean? Moving from awareness to the other. So I already know when we get to goals for the future to improve community outreach, that's the focus on supporting the patient care. You see what I mean? So that's what's going to come out of this as we go through more and more. I'll ask, let's see, that's R, is that, Raul, let me see, RD, why a 5?
I mean, the community outreach is limited to areas where we have functional TB champions. And those TB champions are slowly being adopted by NTP. Wherever they're not there, the outreach, as Katrina says, has not happened in the way that we want it to happen. Which is, I mean, the patient support is limited to only those zones where there are motivated, empowered TB champions who can challenge the system and go into the communities to do that patient mobilization. Otherwise, we are still lacking. So I've given the 5, given the fact that it is happening to the extent where there are TB champions and where there are motivated, empowered TB champions, but there's still long variations in the commitment, in the kind of, health systems they're working in, and what the health systems mean for their function.
And what would it take to get a 6 or a 7 then?
So first, I think initially, the integration of the TB champions more into the system, into the health system, and an open mind from the health system's side that these are people not to point fingers at us, but to add to our, efficiency in terms of not sharing the workload of what they are actually supposed to do and replacing it, but providing quality, inputs into what is the need of the patient, and where the patient is failing to follow up, where the patient is failing to conform to the systems or the norms, the guidelines of the health system, not because the patient is at fault, but the systems are not built up in terms of simple things like access or availability of medicines, or affordability to pay sort of a toto fare to get to the facility. Those are simple sort of things that these TB champions bring up to the health facility, and they kind of point out, in terms of what could be done to kind of allay those things. So the health system has to have an open ear and an open mind to accept those feedback, and thereby improve on that outreach. And that outreach will succeed and continue only when there is an ear and a mind to listen to that, right? It cannot be just blank space they're shouting into. So that's where I think we can move towards the 7 and 8.
Beautiful. Look how powerful this is. This is the kind of thing that's going to come out of this session. We've only been doing this for a very short period of time, this part with the dialogue. This is what we would continue for the rest of, say, an hour, 2 hours in their actual exercise. I just want to give us a feel for it for tonight. But see how powerful this is? We'd be recording all this. We're recording it now tonight, but we'd also be having some folks take notes as much as possible, so we get some of these key insights as to what needs to be done for the future. And we would then, I'd make charts by just copying this, like so, and dragging it over here, and we'll make bar charts out of it. So we know based what the group thinks with a bar chart on the average across everyone, even though we've had a dialogue, which would last maybe another hour or two, asking these same questions, why a 5, why an 8, why a 3, to get a better feel for why we think what we're thinking about. See what I mean? I won't go into more detail now, but I hope that's helpful. That's the kind of dialogue we're going to have that's going to be very rich about what it needs to do. And it totally informs the next one, which is plans for the future.
David, quick question.
Yeah.
At what stage, I mean, because it was really interesting listening to Rahul talking and me talking about community outreach, because actually what I realized is we have different definitions of it.
Yes, exactly. That's what.
So at what stage do you actually define what you mean by that?
That comes through the process, exactly. If we defined everything perfectly when we started, no one could get going because there'd be an academic exercise, people get bored, they'd leave, etc. What happens is as we then do our ratings, people go, well, what did you mean again by community outreach? Or what did you mean by building TB champions again? And people would ask that question, or it would come up in this discussion here and go, well, I was thinking it from this perspective and that perspective, and that's where it gets refined in the actual dialogue. And that's where we sort of concretize the process and the definitions. Each stage you get through, you're defining it more and more. That's the whole idea. When then you go to the implementation, plans for the future, then it's the most concretely defined. We're going to tackle this part of building TB champions. And that way you've got a consolidated view of where to go. But if you keep on defining each stage, people lose the initiative and they won't move forward with that. This way they're getting a gestalt kind of understanding of the different concept all the way through. And most people will be on board, but there will be some difference like that emerges out of this dialogue. And after you go into more detail, you find most of the folks have one kind of definition, one or two may have a slightly different one. They may even have, that's why I go over not just the high and the low, I go the 5 and the 5, because people may have different opinions and views, positive, negative, with the same rating. And that's what I want them to come out with. Over time, they learn how to rate themselves and what numbers mean more from each other. Because you might notice on the bottom, the very bottom, I also will total and average each person so that you can see who's normally optimistic and pessimistic, and you get to know each other from our evaluative core rather than just our political view or religious view or whatever. So the next time, say the dean says something, they know it's going to be overly positive. Mine might be a little more critical, etc. The whole point is that as you go through this process, each stage and each time, you get more and more refined in terms of understanding the concept, the terms that we're working with, as well as the ratings themselves. What a 5 really means, what a 2, etc. Because that is how we get norming and how we get folks to get to understand each other and their concepts, their ideas better at each stage of the game. But if it's totally defined in advance, it won't be bought into, number one. It's going to be a matter of them coming to terms with what it is as they're discussing and dialoguing about it. As we argue about what a 5 or 2 is in relation to, say, TV champions, we're then now getting at our sort of inner core of what we think this is really about and what a champion is and what we're doing about it. And we're also getting a view as to what percentage of us think that we're doing a good job and not such a good job in this area. But the key is to be patient with it as people further and further define for themselves a consensus on what this is, rather than trying to predefine it perfectly before we start, which is, I know, the norm.
Thanks.
That makes sense? That's okay. Okay, I see thumbs up. Okay, just checking.
Perfectly.
Okay, just checking. Sometimes a little bit of a lag, so I couldn't hear. But no, you'll see as we get, the key is to get more and more refined with people buying into it, and they will as they hear each other's definition as it comes through. And you'll see people ask each other, people are going to say in the middle of this, something like, what is TB champion? What are we talking about building sheet? And I'll go, I didn't come up with it. Who came up with that? And they then define it again. So it's going to be part of the process as we go through each stage. Then we take each of these things and we will, remember, we're going to do 10 of these, but when we actually get to plans for the future, we're actually going to only take 3. Tonight, we're only doing 1, just because I don't want to hold everyone up too much longer. For plans for the future, you put in the goal is to improve the building of TV champions. Remember the one I did before on communication? It was improved communication, which the strategies are to create and use agendas, because we weren't using agendas. Reduce overlapping meetings. The evidence is a log of the scheduled meetings, having agendas. This would be improving building TV champions. And I'd ask you, tell me what would be strategies to accomplish this and what would be credible evidence. And that's what we would ask the group. See what I mean? And some of this would be seeing, it could be even a survey of what we call the mindset of other health providers. See what I mean? We would decide together what we think is going to be credible evidence with putting all our heads together. Improving, what would be an improving building a TV champion, by the way? Just what would you throw out there?
David,
Yeah.
I need to move on to another call.
We'll
If
take,
it's okay with you, I have one call to you.
yeah, no problem. We're going to be ending right here anyway. I just wanted to help make sure everyone had a feel for what the plans for the future would be. This would be the process. And then later at a different meeting, I would go over how we create dashboards. So we're coming to a good closing point now anyway, if that's okay with everyone. But does everyone have a good feel for, this is what we want to do? So I think the only thing next stage is identifying a date, either this month or no later than early November, for when we would actually have the workshop. And that's what you can help me with, giving me a couple of dates that work for Reach, and we'll just lock it in.
Sure. And before that, I think we can have another session, as Katrina mentioned, with this core group, on sort of closely knowing the program in terms of the annual work plan, in terms of our major interventions.
Yeah.
And I think then, what Catherine was also saying, getting closely acquainted with what we are going to speak about. Sandeep, Catherine, Katrina, who knows about it.
Yep.
We all can be on the same page then when we are, in this sort of a platform.
Exactly.
So I think we can do that before we move on to the actual workshop.
Yep.
But we're speaking the same lingo at least, and we know that what each other is talking about.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's what we mentioned in our first meeting when we were talking earlier, is that we all have that familiarity first, and then we'd be able to then, and any kind of needs assessment, et cetera, that's related to it, that we then build into this to prepare everyone. Because we also know, remember Sandeep also mentioned we want to know what their expertise is that they might bring to bear to this as well, so that there's a sense of where we can actually use everyone's assets. So those would be the 2 things that we want to do first, but we also want to start planning on what a date would be realistically to move things forward for the actual workshop. But we want to do those 2 things first, so we have a good handle on where to go next.
And the other thing I think we need to clarify and be very clear on, and Rahul, maybe you can help us think this through, is that quite frankly, this works for us. This same process, how does it look for a TB champion or for even a TB patient who isn't reading English, who isn't using Google Sheets, who you know, how, I mean, the actual articulation of that is, I think, really important.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, and at some stage, the sort of Google Sheet using crew needs to be communicating and engaging and interacting with the TB champions, perhaps, and patients, and so on and so forth, and that conversation. And so what does that bridge conversation look like?
Yes, yes, exactly. And to what degree do you want them immersed in the same process, or do you want to do them, have a separate one that then gets merged? That's up to you. I can help you facilitate either way. They both work. So whatever the group is comfortable with.
Sure, Katrina, sure, David. I think we will figure it out as we do this more and as we get more comfortable with the process. I think the litmus test was with the national and the state teams and how they take it up, because they're going to champion it with the next layer of TB champions when we move to that zone. So I think I'm hopeful about the first stage, and then let's see how it moves in the beginning.
I think Rahul, I think it's a very good point from Katrina, and which is more of practical use of the tool in the field with the TB champion. So let's discuss that point. How will you work it out in the field with the TB champions? I think it's a very good point from Kanchita.
Yeah, because that'll be pivotal since they're going to be the help change agents. So it's very important that we get a good handle on what we think, how we define it exactly. I mean, I see them as key change agents anyway. Beautiful. So for our next, we're going to have our regular scheduled meeting. What's the date on that again? Do you remember?
Just a minute, David.
It's going to be 12th.
Say again?
12th or 13th. 13th, I think. 13th, right? No, not 13th, 20th.
Yeah, 20th.
Am I right? 20th?
I think that sounds right. Yep. So send it. Yeah, just send me an invitation on Google Sheets. I mean, on Google Calendar, so we all have the same time zone and everything. And what we'll do in before that, in between, is let's make sure everyone has as much information on the work plan stuff that's already been done, that Katrina was talking about, so that we all have the same information, and we're working toward the same initial goals, etc. Also, look at dates for the actual workshop, and then if we can have time to get information that Sandra mentioned earlier about people's assets that we have in place, that we can then, at least I could get a handle on, look at. It helped me know also where to link people up a little bit better or give my recommendations. If we do those three things sort of as we get towards that next meeting, that'd be great. That sound okay?
Sure.
Beautiful. Any other things anyone wants to mention? Thanks for hanging there so long. I appreciate it. I hope that gave people a better feel for where we want to go for the actual exercise. At another session, we can go over what we would do after that for plans for the future and how that is monitored with this evaluation dashboard and our assistants all the way through as coaches. Sound good?
Sure.
Yeah, David,
Yeah.
David and Rahul quickly. So are we going to do this in another session or in the next call, which is on the 20th?
Well, I'd like to have the work plans shared with everyone who wants to be involved in between. So as soon as possible by next week. And then if we can get either a Google form survey or something that we mentioned last time to get an idea of assets, if we could do it before the meeting, so that the next meeting becomes one of, oh, great, now we can see what our assets are, and I can ask both of you in particular what you think, because we want to be able to start doing assignments. Because I want to share with Katrina, not just like a Gantt chart of the timeline, but I want to say probably where we're having different kinds of recommended assignments for things, and that will help me do that. I have that information. And then we can come up with the timeline for the thing much easier, because we'll know what the first one is. Once we know what the first exercise is, it's very easy then to outline what the 4 quarters are, what the 3 workshops are, etc. That's easy, but we have to know that before. So if we could do that next week before a meeting, that means our next meeting will be a little more productive. We'll actually be able to then launch into the next steps.
Sure. Rahul, is that possible?
Yeah, so sharing the work plan and the Google Forms, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. exactly.
So you can just check the note the summary note that I had shared of the last call, Rahul, when you, David, and I met.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think there are things there. Just have a quick look at it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
And
you
I-
summarized it pretty well. Yeah, I remember.
Yep.
Thank you, Sandeep.
that'd be great. That'd be great. Because then we'd be able to consolidate what we've done so far at the last meeting with this, and then we'd be really ready to sort it out and start implementing and actually have the exercise, because we want to have it as soon as we can, but we want all this information in place. Beautiful. Sound good?
So
yes,
sorry to be the nitpicker on all of this, but it's my head on the chopping board here, so.
Okay.
One of the two things that would be really great that you would consider. One is how you intend to engage USAID. That includes your AOR for this project. It includes the larger mission, you know, because you're not just doing this in isolation. There's a larger institution at stake here. And how do you intend, like, you know, at what stages? It just so happened I reached out to you, David, and therefore I'm sitting on this call, but otherwise I wouldn't have been.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's wonderful that you're doing this and you're moving at this record speed, but I think there's a beast you need to bring along the journey.
Yeah.
So how you're intending to do that would be really helpful for us, a clear articulation of that.
Yeah.
And then also very specifically, I think there's one is to build a larger concept around the mission, but the other is specific players. So that is me, that is Amrita, that is our perhaps, you know, health office director. So there are specific individuals and some will be deeper engaged. There's a whole MEL team. So at what stages do you want the deeper engagement? At what stages is it just a general like orientation for the masses or for USAID? So if you would consider that, and along with that rollout timeline, that would be really helpful for me.
Yeah, if you could send me also the names, contact people that you think should be not in the know, in the loop, and help be aware of what's going on, that'd be great. Because I would like them to be, I want inclusive, I would like to be invited as early as possible to any and all phases of this, not till it's perfect or anything. I want them to see the process as much as soon as possible. They're more likely to buy in and not be surprised or object. And also if they have considerations or problems, we can deal with it right away before it's too late to make sure that they merge into their, because that happens. So send me their contact information. I'll go through you, however, to make sure that we're communicating effectively with the right parties for that part as well. So that'll link up with you and you'll help me with the key people. So in USAID, that we need to make sure we're informed, and we can do it in different ways, by the way, newsletter, actual pictures of our meetings of this nature, brief discussions and invitations to participate in parts of this as well. So it can be multi-level. There's nothing to be worried about as far as that component's concerned. And you have to help us or help me know the key people that we need to communicate with to make sure they're all on board. Sound good?
Right.
Yeah. As you think about it, and you know better than I do who are going to be the key players that need to be aware and kept apprised. You need to let me know, and I'll find different tools, different ways of communicating to them to keep them apprised.
Great.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because we don't want the rug pulled out from under us in the middle of this. We want them to learn all the way through.
Yeah, and generally I will say that is actually Swasti's role.
Okay.
Primarily, I mean, front and center. Yes, you know, if you need the support, they are the managing institution. They are the, you know, so from that perspective, to me, Swasti/CMS is meant to be that entity that kind of facilitates the knowledge of the donor, and that they're aware, and that this is inclusive, that they know what's going on, that they're, you know, managing upward as much as
Good.
kind of executing downward.
Beautiful.
But yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Well, keep me posted on that as well as other key players. And that way we make sure we're all staying in the loop so that everyone's doing what they need to do, since everyone's got a role to make sure that we're communicating up, down, sideways, etc., about what's going on. Because one's a larger community building, but we have to play the chain of command also, make sure everyone's aware of what's going on.
Kashina, just one quick question for you. So
Yes.
people who could be involved from USAID side, will you provide that list to us, or do you want me to internally discuss with Angela and other team members and get it done?
I will provide it for you. David's asked me to. I will provide it for you and,
Okay.
and send it to you, Rahul and David. I think the main people you already know,
Yes.
but I will definitely send you an email.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we just want to make sure we don't leave anybody out that's critical and needs to be in the know, because we want to keep everyone in the loop. Because sometimes, you know, we have a schedule change, we might have some other change. I don't want to be too surprised as these things happen, but everyone stays in the loop all the way through as to what to expect.
And we should do a mission orientation, please, David. Something very similar to what you've just done, but for larger mission.
Yes, yes. And anything that's already been written as a mission already, I'd like to have sent to me so I can then review it, because we want to highlight that as what in honor of the existing mission or missions that exist. And this will be a submission within that. So Rahul might have that, or whoever has the existing set of missions, and also USAID as well. Anything you can send over that we can then highlight as existing missions that we respect and honor, and then our work within that context.
Oh, sorry, I mean USAID mission, the India mission, not, and the only guiding documents that we have very specifically is something called the Country Development Strategy.
Okay, okay.
Country Development Cooperation Strategy, which I can send, but I think it would just submerge you in unnecessary paperwork, quite frankly.
Okay.
But it's just that you've got this 100-odd people that work in development and are a part of the decision-making along the way of projects and where money goes and how it's spent and how it's evaluated.
Yeah.
And since it's so new, it'd be really great if we can have some kind of an orientation for that is open to them. And it, you know, from it, you will have like a handful, 10, 15 people, maybe max, who would be interested in kind of purposefully looking at this.
Yeah.
And each with their own agendas as to why, but we should bring that along so it becomes a larger ecosystem conversation and not just kind of Swasti, CMS, Reach, and David and Katrina talking.
Yeah. Now tell me something. You can help us with timing. What might work best is this: we have the exercise first, write up brief pieces about it, and highlight that in newsletters. And then part of the orientation will be, here's what we've done so far, type of thing. That makes it less abstract. You see what I mean? So I think once we go through the exercise, then we need to market it, as it were, to the right folks.
Okay.
I'm happy to have special sessions for them, but then not highlighting something hypothetical, but actually here's what we've done so far. Take a progress report.
Okay.
Cool. It just
Sounds good.
that way it's more compelling, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So we'll build on what we do, and then we'll market that out to make sure everyone knows about it. That's why I take the pictures also on screen. We can use those later in communicating. Here's how we develop this with our meetings, our actual sessions, follow through, etc. Then they can see the logical chain of what we do. Cool.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, let everybody go. Thanks for hanging in there. Very helpful. This is a fantastic meeting. Really appreciate it. Hope you found it helpful.
I found it very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure, pleasure. All right, take care, everybody. See you for now.
Thank you,
Thanks
David.
very much.
Okay,
Great
bye-
meeting.
Bye, bye, everyone.
bye-bye.